He remembered the smell of dragonfire more keenly than anything else. It clung to the blackened stones, to the charred remnants of rubble littering King's Landing's grand plaza. Smoke curled through empty windows. The sky hung gray with ash, and the Targaryen sigils stitched into every banner along the Red Keep's battlements fluttered on an acrid wind. Tyrion Lannister stood in the courtyard, boots caked in soot, regarding the devastation with hollow eyes. He had witnessed many horrors in his life: the grotesqueries of war, the casual cruelties of the powerful, the indifferent suffering of the powerless. But the siege, no, the sacking of King's Landing, guided by Daenerys Targaryen's fiery wrath, had seared a brand of guilt into him that would never wash away. He had counseled her, once upon a time, to take a gentler route, to show mercy so that the realm might welcome her. Yet in the end, the stench of burning flesh and collapsed rooftops told a tale of conquest unbridled. Even so, here he stood, alive while thousands were dead, and though he still wore the pin upon his chest that marked him as the Hand of the Queen, he wondered if it should more rightly be a badge of shame. A hush lay over the Red Keep. The broken gates had been hastily repaired, the interior yard cleared of bodies, but the entire fortress still held the echoes of the living and the dead. The Targaryen soldiers in sleek armor prowled the corridors, uncertain in their new domain. Most of them came from across the sea and looked upon Westeros with wary curiosity, resentful stares, or both. Theirs was a fractured victory. For some, the triumph felt righteous. Daenerys had overturned a tyrant's dynasty and claimed her birthright at last. For others, it seemed that a terrifying dragon queen had come to subjugate them with fire. Only a handful of souls dared to voice any question, and Tyrion had once been among that handful. Now he was not sure how much voice he had left. Late that evening, amidst flickering torches, Tyrion was summoned to Daenerys's private chambers. She had chosen Maegor's Holdfast, lodging herself amid the forbidding walls that had once shielded Queen Cersei. The unsullied guard stationed at the heavy oak doors regarded Tyrion impassively and did not speak as they opened the way. Inside, he found Daenerys alone at a table strewn with half-open maps. A single candle illuminated the tired lines of her face. Her silver-gold hair was unbound, flowing down her shoulders, and it appeared she had bathed only moments ago, as her skin still held the faint flush of warmed water. She looked up at Tyrion, and for a moment, no words passed between them. He bowed. She gestured for him to rise, but something in her eyes seemed distant, as if she peered through him at something else. "I hear you've been walking among the people," she said softly. "What do they say?" Tyrion felt his heart tighten. "They are afraid," he replied, deciding that honesty, even if it cut like a blade, was the only path left. "Their city lies in ruins, their family splintered. They have no idea what fate awaits them. They see your sigils, your Unsullied, your Dothraki, and they don't know if tomorrow will bring relief or further horror." She exhaled, glancing down at the map. "I wanted a city that welcomed me with open arms. I wanted them to see that I was here to protect them and break the wheel of tyranny." But the bells rang, and she trailed off. A slender hand brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "It's done. The truth is, I should have listened to you more carefully. But in that moment, I saw only betrayal and hatred. I saw a realm that had never truly wanted me. I thought they must be shown the price of defiance." He said nothing, measuring his next words. For a time, the only sound was the low crackle of the candle flame. Then Daenerys looked up, a flicker of determination sparking in her violet eyes. "We have won the war, but peace is more complicated. The people will need a ruler who can bridge these divides. I must be queen, but I have to be more careful of my image, I suppose." In that heartbeat, Tyrion recognized that her mind was a whirl with a plan, a shape of what was to come. He had stood by her in Meereen, witnessing how she struggled with governance. She had listened to advice, sometimes defied it, sometimes learned from it, though always with her own fierce sense of justice. But all of that was overshadowed now by the scorched fields in her wake. She beckoned him closer to the table. He approached, and she lifted a corner of the map. Beneath it, Tyrion noticed a parchment bearing a large wax seal. There was a trembling in her fingertips as she slid it toward him. He unrolled it, straining to read in the meager light. At first, it looked like a letter granting a formal appointment, a queen's decree, and the name upon it was his own. Tyrion read that she, Daenerys of the House Targaryen, the first of her name, breaker of chains, and so on, named Tyrion Lannister the protector of the realm and regent in her stead with full powers to govern the Seven Kingdoms. The Iron Throne was his to occupy, lawfully and publicly. He blinked. Your Grace. What's the meaning of this? His voice trembled with astonishment. She folded her arms and inhaled. I want you to take the throne, at least in the eyes of the people. I need your mind and your cunning in this position. More importantly, I need separation. My name will incite fear in too many hearts. But you, Tyrion, if you sit upon that wretched chair, you may unify them in ways I cannot. You are known, you are cunning, and you have a sense for how to navigate the illusions of power. She paused, pressing her lips into a tight line. I will watch from behind. I am not surrendering my birthright. But the realm may more readily accept a transition they perceive to be guided by a Lannister, ironic as that might seem, than a foreign queen who raised King's Landing. I am tired of being the outsider. But if the realm believes you are the one guiding them, perhaps we can have peace. His first instinct was laughter, but it never reached his lips. The enormity of this proposition staggered him. My queen, he said carefully. I am a dwarf hated by my father, by my sister, by half of Westeros. I doubt very much they'll hail me as a savior. Even if they did, this throne belongs to you by blood. You fought for it. She reached across the table and covered his wrist with her hand. Her grip was surprisingly gentle. The throne is a means to an end. I once thought differently, but I have learned. The throne is a seat from which one might attempt to bring justice, or from which cruelty might reign. The people no longer trust me, not after what I've done. But they might trust the imp who spoke for them, even if that trust begins grudgingly. We can rebuild that trust with you as the face of authority. And I will remain the queen in truth. We will do this together, Tyrion. You understand the game of shadows. Help me lead from behind the curtain. He swallowed hard, reading the sorrow in her expression, the fervor. Perhaps this was her penance. Perhaps she thought to atone for the ruin of King's Landing by placing a more tempered figure at the forefront of rule. Yet he also saw the steel in her. She was no meek supplicant ceding power. She believed she was forging a cunning path. But if Tyrion accepted, would he become a puppet king? Or was it an opportunity to truly guide the realm away from further bloodshed? He thought of all the small folk. He thought of the deep guilt lodged in his heart, of every betrayal, every misjudgment. He thought of Varys, burned alive by dragonfire for his efforts to shape a better outcome. Perhaps Varys would have urged him to accept, to shield the realm from more devastation. Tyrion looked at Daenerys, at the flicker of hope in her eyes, and he remembered the woman who had once shown mercy to slaves and dared to lead the oppressed to liberation. Was that woman still there, or had the embers of rage consumed her? His eyes flicked back to the parchment. He exhaled, feeling as though the weight of the Iron Throne rested physically upon his shoulders. I will do my best, he said at last. If this is truly what you want, what you believe is right for the realm, I will assume the throne in public. But our pact must be clear. I will not merely become your mouthpiece for terror. If I sit that throne, even as a figurehead, I intend to shepherd this kingdom toward peace and reconstruction. I must have your promise that you will stay your dragons the next time you're inclined to bring fire and blood. A tear glimmered at the edge of Daenerys's eye before she blinked it away. She gave a solemn nod. I promise. I've seen enough of war and fire. We will rebuild together. And so it was done. At daybreak, the Unsullied marched Tyrion Lannister to the throne room, where a bare number of the surviving lords and ladies had gathered, confounded by Daenerys' summons. The Iron Throne was still intact, though it bore scorch marks and drips of molten slag from the dragon's assault on the Red Keep. It crouched upon a raised dais, the twisted metal spikes forming a silhouette of jagged cruelty. Tyrion had never looked upon it with such dread. Grey Worm announced him in a clipped, stern voice. The Targaryen soldiers parted to reveal Tyrion, whose face was pale but resolved. Daenerys stood to one side, her posture erect, her eyes quiet. Only she and Tyrion understood the arrangement that was about to unfold. The Watchers had not been told the nature of this ceremony. They suspected further proclamations of Targaryen supremacy. Then Daenerys took Tyrion by the arm and led him to the foot of the throne. In a clear voice that carried the final echoes of foreign accent, she pronounced that she would entrust the power of the realm to her loyal hand, Tyrion of House Lannister, as king in the eyes of Westeros, so that the wounds of war might heal under his guidance. She would remain queen, yes, but she gave him the seat of authority, trusting him to enact the laws and decrees necessary to unify the realm. A stunned murmur rippled across the chamber. Some turned their gazes away, perplexed or offended. Others whispered that the Dragon Queen had gone mad indeed. But Tyrion stood silent, expression set. He ascended the dais, each step feeling like a leaden burden, and he sank into the Iron Throne's cold metal. His short legs did not reach the floor comfortably. The old seat of swords pressed into his back in painful angles. He felt dwarfed by it, as though it swallowed him whole. Beyond the open archways, faint daylight poured in, illuminating the open spaces where the stained glass windows had shattered in the prior assault. There, before all assembled, Tyrion Lannister was proclaimed king, on the understanding that Daenerys Targaryen stood behind him as queen. He looked at the stoic faces of the Unsullied and glimpsed a glimmer of wariness behind Grey Worm's eyes. The notion that a Lannister, even one in Daenerys's good graces, should be placed on the throne must have rankled him. Yet he kept his silence. Such was the beginning of a strange new reign that the bards and gossipmongers soon dubbed the Shadow Reign. Word spread through King's Landing that the dwarf from the Westerlands now wore the crown, and some citizens mocked, some hoped. Rumors abounded that the Dragon Queen was ill or had lost her mind, or was possessed by a demon. Others claimed the entire arrangement was a cunning trap to ferret out traitors. Perhaps all of those suspicions held some small grain of truth. But the city had no time for endless speculation. It needed rebuilding. Every day, new fires sparked amid the wreckage, and the stench of corpses still hung in alleyways. The roads were covered in debris, the poor had lost what little they had. And amid all the chaos, newly crowned King Tyrion tried to set his first decrees into motion. His immediate priority was restoring a semblance of normalcy, which meant ensuring bread, water, and shelter. He found men who still had skill in carpentry and stone masonry, paying them from whatever funds remained in the treasury. He employed them to clear rubble and begin reconstructing markets and homes. He told them it was a new day, that the monarchy would repay them for their labor, that the future of King's Landing depended on their hands. He sought supplies from the Reach, from whatever farmland had not been ravaged by the war. In letters carried by swift riders, he pleaded for grain, offering gold and favorable trade conditions. The Grand City had once teemed with 250,000 souls or more, but now its populace was halved, many having fled or perished. Yet it was still a city, albeit broken. Tyrion's council had to be formed quickly. He allowed each of the lords and ladies who had come for the coronation to remain at the Red Keep, hoping to glean where their loyalties and ambitions lay. He needed a master of laws, a master of coin, a master of ships. He needed a small council that would reflect some measure of unity. But who would serve him? And more importantly, who would watch Daenerys in the shadows? He made notes by candlelight each evening, scrawling names, crossing them out. Grey Worm was a general not suited to the day-to-day governance. The Dothraki leaders had little interest in the intricacies of Westerosi politics. Men like Gendry Baratheon, newly legitimized by the late Queen Cersei's decree, which Daenerys herself had affirmed, might be a good fit for forging alliances among the Stormlands, but Gendry was still green and uncertain. Tyrion mused that perhaps Davos Seaworth would have been ideal for a seat at the council had he not disappeared into the chaos after the final battle. Rumors suggested Davos had fled north, disillusioned with the brutal turn of events. Then there was Bran Stark, that quiet, distant boy who had once been declared king in the North's regent for House Stark. But last Tyrion heard, Bran had retreated to Winterfell, rarely venturing outside. Sansa Stark, the Lady of Winterfell, had severed most of her ties with King's Landing as soon as Daenerys took the city by fire. She did not trust the Dragon Queen, and by extension, she might not trust Tyrion. Jon Snow had vanished entirely after he refused to bend the knee to Daenerys, consumed by his own guilt in the face of the carnage. None of these figures seemed readily available to help rule, which left him with lesser lords, some unscrupulous, some incompetent, a few decent. Tyrion felt the old stirring of cynicism in his gut, that these games of politics were doomed from the start. But something else, too, an ember of hope. If he and Daenerys could succeed in forging a truly just rule from behind the scenes, perhaps the realm could heal. He told himself that he owed it to the innocent dead to try. One late afternoon, Daenerys found him in the council chambers, scribbling frantically over a ledger. She stepped inside, wearing a simple black gown. The only ornamentation was a dragon-shaped pin at her collar. Her hair was braided back from her temples, reminiscent of her old style across the narrow sea. Tyrion glanced up from his clutter of parchments and rubbed his tired eyes. "Your Grace," he said, inclining his head. "Or should I say, Your Majesty? I suppose forms of address get rather confusing now, given my own position." She waved a hand dismissively. "Daenerys is fine when we are alone. I came to see how you fare." She moved closer, her gaze flicking across the parchment-strewn table. "There's a restlessness among the people, but they're not in open revolt. That at least is a relief." Tyrion nodded. "A small mercy indeed. We've begun paying laborers double rations to rebuild key infrastructure. Water supply lines from the hills behind the city were disrupted. Once that's restored, fewer will die of thirst or disease." He sounded wearier than he meant to, but her presence had a way of stirring the complicated emotions he carried. "We'll need an envoy to the north. We need trade, and we need the lords there to pledge at least tolerance of this arrangement." She reached out and touched the back of his hand. Her skin was cool, surprising against his. "I will go north soon, though not for a grand parade. I must speak with Sansa or Jon if he can be found. I want them to see reason. We are not the enemy, not anymore." He wondered if that were entirely true. But he merely nodded. "They say the North never forgets. But perhaps you can persuade them to forgive. Or at least to live with us." He hesitated. "What of the rest of your armies? The Dothraki chafe at staying in one place. And the Unsullied, do they still follow you as loyally as before after all that has happened?" A small frown touched Daenerys' lips. "Grey Worm commands them in my name. They respect him and he respects me. But yes, they grow uneasy. Not because they doubt me, but because they do not understand the ways of this land. They are soldiers, not governors. They desire a clear enemy to crush or a cause to champion. They do not relish waiting in the aftermath of conquest." She sighed. "We must find a path for them as well." He bent over the parchment once more, trying to swallow the dryness in his throat. "I'll see if we can allocate a portion of the crown's lands for them to settle temporarily. But some of them might wish to return across the sea. That might be best." Before Daenerys could respond, the door swung open and Grey Worm stood at the threshold. His face was grim, though it usually was. He locked eyes on Daenerys and spoke in a clipped voice. "There is a crowd at the gate, Your Majesty. They demand audience with the king." He almost spat the last word, though more from confusion than contempt. "They claim to have found a body that belongs to a Lannister, and they want justice." Tyrion's heart lurched. A Lannister? Who would that be? The possibility of extended family, distant cousins, or some wretched retainer in the wrong place at the wrong time flared in his mind. Grey Worm shrugged, his expression cold. "Some minor knight or a distant relative. The people are uncertain, but they talk of murder and want your presence. Will you address them?" Tyrion felt the new weight of the crown like an anvil around his neck. He had tried to keep his official public appearances to a minimum, partly to let the city calm down, partly because the sight of him on the throne was sure to incite mockery or tension. But now it seemed he had no choice. If he was to play his role as king, he had to do so with conviction. He nodded. "I'll come. Summon a detail of guards, but let them stand back. I don't want to greet my people surrounded by steel." A few minutes later, the gates to the Red Keep creaked open, and Tyrion emerged into a courtyard ringed by the battered walls. Beyond them stood a ragged crowd, men in torn cloaks, women clutching sallow-faced children. Their eyes alighted on Tyrion with curiosity and distrust. He swallowed, stepping forward until he was within earshot. An uneasy hush settled over the throng. One of the men hoisted a sack, then appended it. Out tumbled a body, or rather, what remained of it, an older man in dusty finery, the red and gold of House Lannister partially visible on his tunic. His face was contorted, though blood caked the side of his skull. Tyrion recognized nothing about the man, but the golden lion crest was unmistakable. "Who did this?" Tyrion asked softly, scanning the crowd. A woman in front, half her face scarred from some earlier conflict, spat on the ground. "He was found near Flea Bottom, my king. Some men recognized the lion. They said he was trying to bully them for food and lodging, claiming he had gold hidden somewhere. Then they found him like this, with his head bashed in." She narrowed her gaze. "They say it must be revenge for the sack. Or maybe a robber who just wanted his coin." Tyrion looked at the corpse. He felt neither sorrow nor anger, but a hollow acceptance. Men died every day in King's Landing. The city's blood-soaked history rarely spared members of any house, including Lannisters. But these people wanted an answer. They wanted justice, or at least a performance of it. He knelt, gingerly checking the man's pockets. There was a single golden coin stamped with the old face of Robert Baratheon. "No one saw the killer?" Tyrion said, standing again. The crowd shifted restlessly. A few shook their heads. A youth near the back mumbled that it was probably just some starving cutthroat. No witnesses, no confessions. Tyrion sighed. These were the mundane nightmares of ruling. He cast a glance at Daenerys, who stood with Grey Worm and a handful of unsullied soldiers a short distance behind him. She looked tense, uncertain. She did not move forward but let Tyrion handle the matter as king. "So be it." Tyrion forced his voice to carry. "Hear me now. No one should be murdered in these streets, no matter what banner they once bore. This is not the rule of chaos. The crown will offer a reward for information leading to the killer's capture. If none step forward, let this man be buried with dignity. We are done with vengeance. Do you hear me?" His words sparked an uncertain murmur, but many in the crowd wore blank or skeptical faces. "Your children starve, your houses are rubble, and I have no wish to worsen your suffering. Bring me the criminals if you find them. I will see them judged. Until then, let us focus our efforts on rebuilding." Some spat curses at the mention of criminals, but others looked away as though shamed or weary. One older woman muttered that the king is a Lannister. "He's just protecting his own." Tyrion heard it and felt the sting. But if he had no choice but to bear that suspicion, he would. The best he could do was remain steadfast. He called for men to remove the body. 2 Unsullied stepped forward, stoic as statues, and lifted the corpse with brisk efficiency. Tyrion lingered, scanning the crowd a final time. Some bowed their heads. Many remained upright, arms crossed, not quite defiant, but not devoted either. Tyrion turned to Daenerys. "It's done," he said quietly. "Though I suspect it solved nothing. This city might never fully accept me, nor you." She gave him a wan smile. "We'll make them accept us. We have no other choice." That night, Tyrion found it difficult to sleep. Wine did not help, nor did pacing the corridors of the Red Keep. Finally, he wandered into one of the old tower libraries, a place that had remained relatively untouched by dragonfire. He lit a lamp and perused rows of old tomes. Most were histories or genealogies, some overspilling with dust, half chewed by rats. He traced the spines, remembering how once he had found solace in reading. A presence stirred behind him. He spun, half expecting Daenerys. Instead, he found Missandei of Noth, the queen's former translator and confidant, whom Tyrion had believed dead when captured by Cersei. But that had been the impetus for so many terrible choices. He stared in shock for a heartbeat before recalling she had indeed been executed publicly before Daenerys's final siege. His breath caught. Another ghost. He blinked, heart-pounding, until he realized it was just a shadow formed by the wavering lamplight against the shelves. Memory played cruel tricks. Missandei was gone. Another life lost to the storms of war. He rubbed his temple and felt the weight of grief. In a corner of the library, a small window overlooked the courtyard. He stood there, letting the faint breeze touch his face. In the courtyard below, a single figure in a hooded cloak paced, lost in thought. The figure moved with a certain tension in the shoulders. Tyrion recognized it, Daenerys. She walked alone as if drawn to the darkness. He wondered what prayers she might whisper to the night. Did she regret the destruction, or did she only regret the way Westeros had greeted her? A pang of pity and wariness flared in him. They were bound together now in an impossible arrangement. How long before the illusions broke and real power had to be exercised? He remained at the window, unmoving, until Daenerys disappeared into the gloom. At some point, the candle guttered and he realized dawn was not far away. Sighing, he left the library to catch a meager hour of sleep before the new day's trials. He dreamed of dragons that night. A black silhouette soared over a city of skeletons, spewing flame until the bones glowed red. Then the dragon alighted on a dais of molten swords, turning to face Tyrion with burning eyes. He woke drenched in sweat, cursing the nightmares that refused to let him be. The next day, a large caravan arrived at the city gates. Word reached Tyrion that it came from Highgarden, bearing supplies of grain and wine. Over 100 wagons trundled past the battered walls, accompanied by a retinue of soldiers wearing sigils of the Tyrell Rose, though House Tyrell was extinct. Tyrion knew the new Warden of the Reach was a distant cousin of the old House Tyrell, a man named Alfred Fossaway, attempting to curry favor. He had quickly swapped sigils, brandishing the Tyrell Rose for the sake of tradition in these uncertain times. Tyrion arranged a brief audience with the caravan leaders. Payment was offered, of course, from the crown's dwindling gold reserves, and these traveling merchants seemed eager enough to do business, though they cast uneasy looks at the silent Unsullied who stood guard in the throne room. That afternoon, as Tyrion was finalizing the negotiations, Daenerys entered, her face calm. The merchants bowed, calling her "Your Grace" and "My Queen," clearly uncertain how to address the new power dynamic. Tyrion explained that these caravans were vital. With a gesture, he had a clerk bring forth the coin. Daenerys studied the men, then said in a firm voice, "You've done a great service bringing food to our people. May your journey home be swift and safe. Should you wish to bring more in the future, the crown will welcome you." Her tone carried a subtle undercurrent of authority. The men nodded eagerly, took their payment, and departed. When the throne room cleared, Daenerys spoke softly, her gaze lingering on the empty expanse of scorched floor. "It surprises me how quickly gold changes hands, how quickly men come to feed upon a war-ravaged city in the name of profit. But at least our people will eat." She turned to Tyrion. "I have decided to make a gesture of goodwill. I want to release the prisoners in the cells who were captured solely for being from rival houses. There are some Stormlanders who once served Cersei, some of the northern men we took hostage. I believe setting them free may help quell whispers of cruelty." Tyrion inclined his head. "It's a wise idea. Let us show mercy where we can. But we should monitor them. They might become trouble if left to roam free." She gave a small nod. "Agreed. Place them under a form of parole, if you will. They remain in King's Landing, but they must report weekly to someone we trust." A ghost of a smile tugged at her lips. "Perhaps Gendry can manage it. Or one of the City Watch captains." That hint of wry humor calmed Tyrion's worries, at least momentarily. It was a step one that suggested Daenerys wanted to be seen as merciful. Step by step, they might yet salvage this new rule if the city did not choke on its own fear first. Tyrion felt the slightest bit of optimism stirring in him. The days that followed brought a slow but steady improvement. The reek of death receded as bodies were buried, some in mass graves outside the walls. Tyrion's efforts to organize the distribution of food yielded fewer bread riots than expected. Gradually, a flicker of industry returned to the charred ruins. Blacksmiths set up forges, street vendors hawked fresh produce. Soldiers patrolled the streets, but there were no large-scale skirmishes, just the occasional murder or theft, which was handled with stern justice. Tyrion took small solace in seeing children running through the narrow alleys again, chasing each other with sticks instead of cowering in fear of dragons overhead. Though Drogon, Daenerys' remaining dragon, still soared beyond the city from time to time, the beast rarely threatened the populace, preferring to roost on a distant tower or on the scorched fields outside the walls. This was intentional. Daenerys wanted to avoid reminding them of the horror she had rained upon them. Yet as time passed, the realm beyond King's Landing stirred with fresh problems. Tyrion learned from riders that the Iron Islands had begun raiding along the western coast, taking advantage of the chaos. The Vale was suspicious of the new regime, and the Riverlands seethed with resentments left over from the long wars. Winterfell remained silent, apart from rumors that Sansa Stark had declared the North an independent kingdom once again, refusing to acknowledge any overlord, be it Targaryen or Lannister. Tyrion realized that the fractures of Westeros would not heal simply by rationing bread and burying bodies in King's Landing. They had to address the Lord's demands, or risk a splintered continent unraveling into smaller conflicts. One morning, Daenerys stood with Tyrion on a balcony overlooking the city. The air was crisp, carrying a tang of salt from Blackwater Bay. She wore a simple gray cloak. Her hair, half braided, stirred in the breeze. Tyrion noticed the sadness etched into her features as she gazed upon the still wounded city. He spoke, voice steady. "If we want to keep Westeros whole, we need to travel and make alliances. A royal progress, if you will. Appear before each region, not to threaten, but to extend peace. They must see that we offer them more than fear." She nodded slowly, still gazing at the sprawl of roofs and the curling tendrils of smoke. "We will go, yes, but how do we do this without inciting more suspicion? If I ride out with an army, they will see me as a conqueror. If you, as king, travel alone, they may suspect you're weak and seize you. We must be careful." Tyrion tapped his chin, considering. "We can bring a modest escort of Unsullied, enough to ensure no band of outlaws can ambush us, but not so many that we look ready to burn every town. We focus on the lords first, try to secure their fealty with the promise of reconstruction funds, or the possibility of trade with Essos. Remind them that war has cost them dearly, and our new regime is the best chance of regaining stability. She tore her gaze from the city, meeting Tyrion's eyes. And if they refuse? He swallowed. We persuade them with words or with coins. If that fails, we must be prepared for them to scheme against us. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Let's begin with the Stormlands or the Reach, where we have some measure of acceptance. Then we move outward. She hesitated, then placed a hand on the stone railing. Very well. Make the arrangements. We'll leave enough garrison here to keep the city from erupting in our absence. And so the notion of a royal progress was born. Letters were dispatched to the lords of the south, announcing that King Tyrion Lannister and Queen Daenerys Targaryen would visit within the moon's turn, seeking unity and cooperation. Tyrion suspected many would tremble at the thought of the Dragon Queen riding to their gates, but at least it was not an invading host of thousands. Before they could depart, however, a group of freshly arrived refugees from the west brought news of renewed chaos in the Riverlands. Bands of former Lannister soldiers had turned to brigandage. Peasants starved and local lords bickered over whose responsibility it was to keep the peace. Tyrion felt a pang of shame. These were likely men who once served his father or his late brother Jaime. Their scattered loyalties were as meaningless now as a puff of smoke, yet they caused real harm. That news prompted Tyrion and Daenerys to alter their plans. They would start by traveling to the Riverlands, hoping to quell these brigands and bring the local lords in line. Preparations were swift. A small retinue was formed. Grey Worm led 50 Unsullied, an honor guard more ceremonial than militarily overwhelming. A handful of lesser knights from King's Landing accompanied them, and a wagon carried tents and provisions. Tyrion wore light armor rather than regal finery, for he had learned from painful experience that war zones cared little for crowns. Daenerys rode upon a pale mare, white as bone, while Tyrion and the others traveled on horses or in carriages. Drogon soared above once or twice, but mostly the dragon followed at a distance, rarely venturing near the main party unless Daenerys willed it. As they left the city behind, Tyrion cast a final glance at the Red Keep, now guarded by a skeleton crew of Targaryen loyalists. The blackened walls jutted against a sky thick with cloudy gloom, as though the city itself were reluctant to trust the horizon. But Tyrion felt an odd stirring, an inkling that perhaps on the roads of Westeros they might find the path to mend these wounds. The first stretch of the journey took them through farmland that had been scorched or trampled. Plumes of blackened trees loomed. Occasionally they passed a farmstead where people watched warily, uncertain whether to welcome or hide from the royal party. Tyrion made sure that any who approached received a small token, a bit of coin, some reassurance that the crown offered them protection. Daenerys watched these interactions from atop her mare, sometimes dismounting to exchange a few words. The unsaid reality was that many of these people had lost loved ones during her conquest. Now she tried to be gentle, and some responded, if not with gratitude, at least with a kind of wary acceptance. By the time they reached the outskirts of the Riverlands, rumors of brigands and scattered warbands grew more frequent. Tyrion noticed that even Grey Worm grew uneasy, scanning the horizon for threats. One afternoon, they discovered a gutted village, black smoke curling from the remains of cottages. Bodies littered the dirt paths, each wearing crude Lannister emblems torn from old tabards. Tyrion knelt beside a crumpled shape that had once been a young woman, face frozen in terror, her hair soaked in blood. He closed his eyes for a moment of silent sorrow. He felt Daenerys' presence behind him. Her voice, low, trembled with anger. Who could do this? Tyrion stood, wiping a hand across his brow. Either these men turned to banditry under the Lannister banner, or others used that banner to sow chaos in my house's name, hoping to stir the region against the crown. We won't know until we find them. She turned to Grey Worm, ordering him to send scouts. The Unsullied fanned out, scanning for tracks, while Tyrion and Daenerys waited amid the scorched rubble. Tyrion noticed a worn doll on the ground, half-trampled. The question gnawed at him: did Daenerys see these horrors as a reflection of her own destruction, or would she externalize all blame? The hatred in her eyes suggested she saw these marauders as vile enemies. If they threatened her fragile realm, she would not hesitate to crush them. Tyrion swallowed. He had hoped to avoid more violence, but perhaps that was naive. A realm seldom found peace without first confronting its most violent factions. The scouts returned at dusk, reporting that a band of about 30 brigands was camped a few miles off the main road near a shallow stream. That night, under Daenerys' authority, Grey Worm led a swift strike against the camp. Tyrion accompanied them, partly out of duty, partly out of a curiosity that felt more like dread. They crept close, using the cover of tall reeds and scattered trees. The flicker of campfires revealed men in ragtag armor, none in a semblance of discipline. Some lounged, drinking stolen wine, while others dozed under makeshift tents. A battered lion crest hung from a nearby branch, marking them as Lannister loyalists or pretenders. At Daenerys' nod, Grey Worm and the Unsullied emerged with silent precision. A harsh shout went up from the camp, but the men had little time to react. Spears found their targets, sides were cast aside in frantic attempts to block. The skirmish was brutal, short, and decisive. A few brigands tried to flee, only to be cut down by the swift discipline of the Unsullied. When the fighting ended, Daenerys and Tyrion rode in, surveying the aftermath by moonlight. A dozen men lay dead, another 15 captured. Among them was a burly fellow with a ragged beard who wore a token around his neck shaped like the golden lion of House Lannister. They rounded up the captives who huddled in the dirt, some nursing wounds. Daenerys' expression was cold. She demanded to know why they carried her king's banner in these lands. One man spat that they followed the rightful Lannister rule. Another claimed they hated the Targaryen queen for burning the city. Yet another mumbled that they were just trying to survive, that the banner was merely a tactic to scare peasants into handing over food. Tyrion listened in silence, the flickering torchlight throwing shadows on the men's fearful faces. A wave of disgust and sorrow washed over him. These men had embraced the worst impulses in this time of chaos, tarnishing the name of Lannister further as if it could sink any lower. Tyrion wondered if the entire realm would remain shattered for generations to come. Daenerys looked at Tyrion, a question in her eyes. She was the queen in truth, but he was the king in name. Perhaps she awaited his judgment. He felt the weight of that expectation. His mouth went dry. He squared his shoulders and turned to the men. You have raided innocent villages, murdered families, and defiled the banners of the crown. For your crimes, you must face justice. He paused, hating the words that came next. The penalty for murder and brigandage is death. Some of the men whimpered. One shrieked a desperate plea for mercy. Tyrion's heart pounded with regret, but the law was the law, and these men were no misunderstood victims. Their crimes littered the countryside with corpses. If he showed mercy here, he might embolden hundreds of other brigands. Daenerys nodded, that cold, distant look returning to her features, reminiscent of the day she had burned King's Landing. Tyrion stepped close and muttered, "A quick death, please. No theatrics." She inclined her head. "Grey Worm, see that it's done swiftly." Grey Worm barked an order, and the Unsullied prepared the men for execution. Tyrion turned away, swallowing thickly. He thought of how many times he had witnessed death in the name of justice, how many times he had participated in the violence of this realm. Had he become desensitized? Or was he simply resigned to the inevitability of it all? The night air resonated with the sound of swords and then silence. Tyrion closed his eyes, taking little solace in the knowledge that, this time, no dragon fire had been unleashed. This was the cost of forging order from chaos. In the days that followed, they pressed deeper into the Riverlands. More villages had been raided, some by these Lannister brigands, some by desperate men from other factions. Tyrion, Daenerys, and Grey Worm repeated their pattern, track down and eliminate the culprits, proclaim a swift but unflinching justice. They left behind small garrisons of Unsullied or loyal knights, each group tasked with restoring a semblance of peace. The people greeted them with ambivalence, fearful of the Dragon Queen, wary of the Lannister king, yet marginally relieved that someone was stopping the brigands. Slowly, a rumor emerged that perhaps these new monarchs, one famed for cunning and one for dragons, were determined to end the lawlessness. At River Run, they were met by Edmure Tully, recently returned to his ancestral seat after years of captivity under the Freys. The man looked older, wearier. Edmure greeted them with politeness but not warmth. He recognized Daenerys as the victor of the war, but he still harbored resentment for the devastation wrought on his lands. Nonetheless, Tyrion succeeded in negotiating a modest alliance. If the crown would help rebuild the region and keep the brigands at bay, House Tully would provide grain barges to King's Landing along the rivers. Edmure's acceptance was half-hearted, but it was still acceptance. Daenerys and Tyrion spent several days at Riverrun, resting their party and consulting with local lords. During this time, Tyrion had a private audience with Edmure in which the Tully lord expressed doubts about the nature of Daenerys' rule. Tyrion, in turn, explained their aims for a just governance, acknowledging the scars left by war. Edmure listened, unconvinced, but did not voice outright opposition. He seemed content to keep his autonomy while offering nominal support. Tyrion sensed that was the best he could hope for right now. When their time at River Run ended, Daenerys decided they should continue traveling west toward the areas hardest hit by the conflict between the remnants of the Lannister army and various rebels. Tyrion was loath to revisit the Westerlands. A swirl of memories weighed him down: Casterly Rock, the bitter ghosts of his father and siblings, and the knowledge that his house had all but collapsed. But if forging peace demanded it, he would go. So onward they went, forging a path that took them near the ruins of Harrenhal, a cursed castle rumored to be haunted. In the gloom of an overcast morning, they approached Harrenhal's towering black walls. Smoke from distant cooking fires indicated that some squatters or soldiers might have made camp within. Grey Worm scouted ahead with a small detachment. They found a ragtag group claiming to be loyal to the crown, but in truth they were just deserters seeking shelter behind the formidable walls. Daenerys and Tyrion agreed to let them remain, provided they made no trouble, and posted a small garrison to keep order. In the great hall of Harrenhal, with its vaulted ceilings melted by dragonfire centuries ago, Tyrion gazed at the twisted stone. He remembered the tales of Aegon's conquest. Now, a descendant of Aegon stood at his side, forging a new reign with a Lannister as the public sovereign. History, it seemed, was not without its sense of irony. They spent the night in Harrenhal's lesser chambers, though the castle was half-ruined. Tyrion tried to sleep but found only restlessness. He wandered into the courtyard beneath a cold moon. There he found Daenerys, again alone, standing near a collapsed tower. Her silver-gold hair shimmered in the moonlight. For a moment, they simply stood side by side in the chill night air, saying nothing. The wind whispered through the scorched battlements above. Finally, Daenerys spoke, her voice quiet. "When I was a child, I heard stories of how my ancestors burned this castle to ruin. It was said to be unassailable, built by Harren the Black. Yet dragonfire melted these walls." She traced the charred stone with her fingertips. "The same fire that I unleashed upon King's Landing." Tyrion swallowed, not sure if she invited sympathy or condemnation. He hesitated, then said softly, "You are not Aegon the Conqueror, nor are you Harren the Black. You're Daenerys Targaryen. What you do from this day forward is your story." She closed her eyes, her breath trembling. "I once believed I was destined to break the wheel of tyranny. Instead, I've stained the land with fire and fear. Now, all I can do is try to set it right in some way." She looked at him. "And you, Tyrion? Do you regret taking this crown in name only?" He let out a hushed laugh. "Every day. But I do it anyway. Because perhaps with this precarious arrangement, we might actually save this realm from complete ruin. If I must endure jeers and suspicion to do that, so be it." He glanced at her profile in the moonlight. "But do not think I am blind to the risk. If we fail, all of Westeros may be plunged back into war. Or, gods forbid, you might decide once more to use fear as your weapon." She set her jaw. "I cannot change the past, but I have promised you I will not let rage guide me again. If it tries to rise, I'll remember the charred faces in King's Landing. That will never leave me." A long silence stretched between them. He saw the haunted look in her eyes, and for a moment he allowed himself to believe that perhaps she truly meant to avoid repeating the atrocities that had tainted her reign's beginning. He also sensed an unspoken question. Did he believe in her? The honest answer was complicated. He believed that she wanted redemption. But desire alone did not guarantee success. They remained there, side by side, until the cold drove them inside. Tyrion took that as a small sign of unity, two flawed rulers, each harboring burdens of guilt, forging forward out of obligation and a shred of hope. At dawn, they departed Harrenhal and continued west, encountering more signs of chaos. Some villagers had banded together in makeshift militias to ward off raiders. Others had fled to more secure towns. On the roads, travelers gave the royal party a wide berth, uncertain whether to kneel or run. And each night, Tyrion wrestled with nightmares. Finally, they reached the region near Casterly Rock. Tyrion remembered the fields and hills that had once bustled with proud Lannister bannermen. Now, a hush lay over the land. The rock itself loomed in the distance, perched on the shore. It was a fortress that had defied ages of conflict, but it no longer housed the family that once ruled it. Gold mines had run dry, and House Lannister was a husk of its former power. They arrived at the gates, announcing themselves. The Castellan, a distant cousin of Tyrion's mother's side, rushed out, astonished to see the dwarfish king in company with a Targaryen queen. The fortress had lost most of its grandeur. Only a small guard garrison remained, plus a handful of servants. Tyrion, taking a deep breath, set foot in the courtyard where he had played as a child, always overshadowed by Jaime's golden prowess and Cersei's regal bearing. Now both siblings were gone, the entire line nearly extinguished. He felt no triumph, only a hollow sense of passing. The Castellan apologized for the poor state of the castle's provisions. Tyrion waved it off. He did not come to be fated in the manner of a Lannister lord. He came to see what remained, to see if Casterly Rock could still be part of Westeros's future. Daenerys surveyed the high walls, the stony keep, with mild curiosity, as though she were trying to fathom how this place had shaped Tyrion. That night, they dined in a small hall that once housed lavish feasts. Now, only a single table was set with meager fare: roasted fish from the nearby coast, some root vegetables, a bit of bread. Tyrion shared a few memories of the castle's golden past, mostly for Daenerys' benefit. Grey Worm listened, impassive. A handful of Unsullied stood guard. After the meal, Tyrion took Daenerys on a brief tour of the fortress. They walked silent corridors, passing tapestries depicting Lannister victories, fabled hunts, the wedding of Tywin Lannister. Tyrion felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. He paused at one tapestry that showed a younger Tywin flanked by Cersei and Jaime as children, all with proud smiles. Tyrion's own likeness was absent, as he had not yet been born, or perhaps his father simply chose to exclude him. The tapestry reminded him of everything he had lost, or perhaps had never truly possessed. Daenerys stood quietly, letting him gather himself. Finally, he shook his head and continued on, descending to a vantage point that overlooked the sea. A brisk wind whipped at them. He leaned on the battlements, gazing down at the dark waves crashing against the rocky base of the castle. Daenerys joined him. "You once told me Casterly Rock was more than just your family's seat. You said it was a symbol of power, wealth, and pride." Now, seeing it so diminished, she trailed off. He let out a breath that misted in the cool air. "Everything fades, Daenerys. Even the mightiest houses crumble. House Targaryen fell once. House Lannister is nearly gone. The real question is, what do we do with this knowledge? Repeat the mistakes of the past, or build something better?" She was silent for a time, her expression contemplative. Below them, the sea continued its relentless assault, the waves surging. Then, softly, she placed her hand atop his on the cold stone. He looked at her, and in her gaze he saw not pity but understanding. Two children of powerful houses that had wreaked havoc on the realm, now left to rebuild from ashes. A faint moonlight touched her face as she spoke. "Let us build something better. Let us try for all those who have paid the price." He nodded, the wind whipping at his hair. So many words remained unspoken. He could not forget the horrors she had unleashed. Yet he recognized that she truly wanted, to turn a page. This realm might never fully forgive her or him, but they could at least give Westeros a chance to heal. If that meant continuing this precarious charade, with Tyrion on the throne and Daenerys as the power behind it, then so be it. They lingered there, letting the crashing of the waves fill the silence. In that moment, Tyrion imagined he glimpsed a path, faint but real, leading out of the darkness. Whether they could maintain that path, or whether old resentments and new threats would tear them apart, he could not say. But for now at least, they were bound by the shared conviction that the realm deserved a chance at peace. He took one more look at the sea, remembering his youth, the heartbreak of his father's contempt. Then he turned away from the ocean's tumult and walked back inside with Daenerys, determined to face whatever awaited them with as much resolve as he could muster. They left Casterly Rock soon after dawn, passing through the gates with a somber escort of Unsullied, their cloaks snapping in the ocean wind. Tyrion cast one last glance at the towering fortress carved into the cliffside. Memories tugged at him, his father's stern disapproval, Jaime's rare warmth, Cersei's sharp-edged cruelty. He could almost hear the distant echo of their voices. But ghosts belonged to the past, and the living had to guide Westeros forward. He spurred his horse along, catching up to Daenerys, who rode at the front of the small column. The journey southward proved no gentler than their route west. Rumors reached them of further raiders who bedeviled the coastal villages. Some called themselves Ironborn, though the truth was muddled. A few seemed to be actual reavers from the Iron Islands, while others were simply desperate men using the Ironborn's fearsome reputation to extort and pillage. Every time Tyrion conferred with Daenerys, they weighed whether to hunt each band down. But they were few in number and couldn't chase every rumor across the breadth of the land. Instead, they tried to direct what meager local forces remained to defend their homes. Tyrion felt a constant pressure behind his eyes. He had to keep telling these exhausted, traumatized lords and peasants that better days lay ahead. Yet each new village had its fresh tragedies. At a small crossroads hamlet, they encountered a group of refugees stumbling along the road. One man, hollow-eyed and dust-streaked, recognized Tyrion's face from the descriptions swirling through the realm, the dwarf in the black and gold cloak, called King. He begged for an audience. Tyrion dismounted and stood in the road, Daenerys beside him, while Grey Worm and the Unsullied formed a ring at a respectful distance. The man explained that his hamlet, too small to appear on most maps, had been sacked by strangers who spoke of the Iron Islands. They'd seized their store of salted fish, torched half the huts, and left the survivors with nothing. Now they wandered, seeking some place to rebuild. Tyrion listened, his heart tightening. "Where will you go?" he asked gently. "There are relief efforts in King's Landing, but that is a long road." The man shrugged helplessly. "No place is safe. Maybe we'll head inland, away from raiders. But we have neither coin nor food." Daenerys dismounted then, her cloak swirling in the dusty air. "Return to King's Landing if you can, or to River Run, whichever is closer. We've pledged to supply bread and shelter while the realm recovers. If you meet trouble on the roads, tell them you are under the crown's protection." The man's eyes flicked from Daenerys to Tyrion, uncertain. Why would they believe us? Tyrion reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small wax seal, the imprint of the Iron Throne upon it. "Show them this. It won't guarantee safety in every corner of the 7 kingdoms, but it will convince at least some guards or lords to lend a hand. That is the best we can offer for now. We are rebuilding a realm in tatters." He pressed the seal into the man's trembling hands. The refugees bowed, though it was more an awkward bend than a graceful gesture. Exhaustion clung to all of them. Tyrion promised them that if they ever reached the city, the crown would do its utmost to feed them. He watched as they trudged on, carrying children, helping older kin. The lines of their footsteps disappeared into the dusty horizon. Daenerys' gaze lingered on them until they were out of sight. Perhaps she saw in their plight echoes of her own wandering youth in Essos when she'd had nothing but her brother's increasingly desperate dreams. They pressed on. Within a fortnight, they reached the broad borders of the Reach once more, though they avoided Highgarden for the time being. Tyrion's letters had already secured crucial grain shipments from those lands. Instead, they turned east, aiming to circle back toward King's Landing from a different route. Late summer sun beat down on them, forging an unseasonable heat. The Unsullied marched silently, neither complaining nor showing signs of fatigue. Tyrion found himself envying their stoic discipline, his own back ached from the constant riding. On the 18th day since leaving Casterly Rock, they approached a minor castle perched beside a river fork. The lord was an older man named Lord Galt, sworn in theory to the Tarleys before the Tarley line had been mostly destroyed in the war. Now Galt's loyalties were uncertain. Tyrion asked for permission to pass through safely and rest a night behind the castle walls. After some tense negotiations at the gate, Lord Galt finally agreed, though he sent only a low-ranking steward to greet them in the courtyard. Tyrion glanced at Daenerys, who raised a brow. She recognized the slight, but she made no comment. They were led into a small hall with a fraying banner bearing a green hawk or maybe a falcon of some local design. Lord Galt eventually appeared, flanked by half a dozen men with nervous eyes. He was tall and gaunt, with a long white beard. He eyed Daenerys from across the hall. "So," he said in a creaking voice, "this is the Dragon Queen and our new king." He hesitated over the word. "Welcome to my humble seat, though I did not expect royalty would come calling." Daenerys gave a polite nod. Tyrion stepped forward, mindful that he was expected to speak in the realm's eyes. "We thank you for your hospitality, my lord. We're traveling to gauge the state of these lands. The war has left many scars." He kept his tone measured. "We hope to assist with reconstruction and keep the peace. I trust you've encountered no trouble from raiders." Galt pursed his lips. "We keep our walls manned. A few of those wretched bands roamed by, sniffing for spoils, but we gave them a volley of arrows. They fled. We can look after ourselves." He glanced at Daenerys again. "There's no call for foreign troops in our domain." Tyrion forced a thin smile. "We're relieved you're safe. We won't impose upon you further than necessary. Might we share your roof for a single night? Our men are in need of rest, and we can pay for provisions." Galt rubbed his beard, eyes calculating. He probably wanted to turn them away, but he couldn't openly refuse the king and the Targaryen queen who could bring a dragon down upon him. So he nodded stiffly and ordered the steward to show them to spare chambers in the keep. That evening, Tyrion and Daenerys dined in a cramped side room while the Unsullied camped in the courtyard. The meal was plain but filling. Lord Galt did not join them. He sent a few servants to bring salted meat, bread, and watered wine. Grey Worm took his meal standing by the door, barely acknowledging the servants. Daenerys ate sparingly, eyes distant. Tyrion tried to make small talk, but she answered in brief murmurs. He sensed her mind was elsewhere, perhaps dwelling on how she was received, a grudging courtesy born more of fear than respect. Night fell, and Tyrion found himself pacing a tiny chamber with a single narrow window. Down in the courtyard, the Unsullied's torches glimmered, and a handful of Galt's men patrolled the walls. It was quiet enough that Tyrion could hear the wind rustling through the river reeds outside the keep. He took a sip of wine, but it tasted sour. Before long, he wandered out into the corridor, trying to ease the tension coiled in his muscles. He caught a glimpse of Daenerys at the other end of the hall, her cloak draped over her arm as though she were about to venture outside. He made to follow, but an approaching footman intercepted him, bowing and announcing that Lord Galt had changed his mind and wished to see the king in his solar. Tyrion hesitated, glancing again at Daenerys' receding figure. Then he told the footman to lead on. If Galt had something to say, perhaps it would be wise to hear it. The solar was a small, cluttered chamber strewn with old books and half-broken chairs. Galt stood near a window slit, arms folded. When Tyrion entered, he motioned for the footmen to wait outside, leaving them alone. "You asked to see me, my lord?" Tyrion ventured, trying to sound cordial. Galt nodded curtly. "Aye. Listen here. I have no quarrel with you, personally. Your father, well, he was a fearsome man, but we seldom dealt with House Lannister so far south. As for your queen, I have no love of the Targaryens, not after hearing what she did to King's Landing. But I am an old man. I seek no war as long as you keep your dragons well away from my folk." Tyrion studied the lord's wrinkled face. "No war is precisely what we hope to maintain. If we seem to loom over your domain, it's only because the realm is unstable. We're trying to patch the holes before everything collapses." Galt sniffed. "Patch the holes, is it? Humph. Then patch the Iron Islands. Their ships prowl my waters. My fishermen dare not venture too far west." He gave Tyrion a flat stare. "You call yourself king. Do something about them." Tyrion inclined his head. "We will. And with your permission, we might set up a watchtower along the coast to guard against such raids. It would protect your small folk as well." Galt paused, stroking his beard. "You'd man it with your Unsullied, I suppose? More foreign soldiers always suspicious of us. But if it deters the Ironborn, I may allow it." He exhaled. "So be it. Spare me your grand speeches. Just keep these lands out of further war. That's all I want." With that, Galt ended the conversation. Tyrion bowed and left, relief mixing with unease. Such alliances were tenuous. One misstep, one rumor of a dragon overhead, and Galt might barricade his gates or even strike out. Tyrion could not blame him entirely. War had taught everyone to fear each new wave of power. Returning to the corridor, Tyrion found Daenerys gone. He asked a passing servant if she had gone outside, but the man shrugged cluelessly. Tyrion roamed the keep until he reached an open gallery leading onto a rampart. There, he found her standing by a merlon, looking down at the darkness where the river fork glinted under a slice of moonlight. She glanced over as he approached. "How is Lord Galt?" "As welcoming as a porcupine," Tyrion replied, leaning on the stone. "But I suspect we've reached an accord. He'll allow a watchtower on his coast if we staff it. It might keep the Ironborn from ravaging these shores." Daenerys nodded. "It's something." She paused, the night breeze stirring her hair. "I know this is the only way, visiting lords, forging agreements, bridging the gaps. But it feels like every step forward might crumble beneath us. The realm still sees me as the foreign invader who brought flame upon King's Landing." He glanced sidelong at her. "They see me as well, me. The imp who once served Joffrey, who served your father's enemies, who opposed them, who knows. My loyalties shift like the wind, they say. In truth, we're both tarnished in the public mind. But that tarnish might unite us in a strange way. Let them see we aim for peace, however imperfectly." She let out a slow breath. "I wish it were that simple." They lingered in the hush, the faint sound of water lapping below. After a time, Daenerys said, "We'll reach King's Landing in another week or two if we continue at pace. Let's see what has transpired in our absence. Then we can decide whether to address the Iron Islands directly or seek out the north. One way or another, we can't ignore Sansa forever." Tyrion bowed his head in agreement. "Sansa is too formidable a leader to dismiss. If the North remains independent, that's a grievous blow to the realm's unity, but maybe that's precisely what the realm needs. Perhaps we must learn to accept that not all the 7 kingdoms wish to remain under the same crown." Daenerys' lips thinned, but she did not dismiss his words outright. "I will think on it," she said quietly. "We'll need a plan before we ride north. We both know Sansa won't bend the knee without something in return." Tyrion nodded, not pressing the matter. They parted soon after, retreating to their separate chambers for a restless night. Within a few days, they moved on, the small retinue continuing eastward. Their route skirted rolling hills, farmland that had not fully recovered from the war. In the dusty fields, workers cast them wary looks. Now and again, Tyrion encouraged Grey Worm to offer small casks of supplies for the laborers, but they couldn't help everyone. Some recipients scurried off in fear, uncertain whether the gesture was genuine or a ruse. At midday on a sweltering afternoon, their column encountered another caravan of refugees heading west. Some carried meager possessions on their backs, others rode in rickety carts. A few men brandished sticks or farm tools for defense. When the two groups crossed paths, the refugees drew back in alarm at the sight of unsullied spears. Tyrion urged his horse forward, raising a hand. "We mean you no harm," he called. A man near the front, probably the leader of this ragged band, bowed stiffly. "Begging pardon, your grace, but we're heading away from King's Landing. We heard rumors of plague in the city or some dire sickness creeping through the slums." Tyrion felt a jolt in his chest. "Plague? That's the first I've heard. Where did this rumor come from?" The man shrugged. Traders passing near the Rose Road said the city was rife with disease, that bodies were piled in the streets again, that a new pox had broken out. "We'd rather take our chances elsewhere." Daenerys guided her mare closer, frowning. "We have had no messages to that effect. Surely the city watch or our stewards would have sent word." The refugees exchanged glances, uncertain. One woman muttered that she'd rather trust in rumors than walk into a nest of sickness. Tyrion forced a calm expression, though worry gnawed at him. He urged the caravan to be cautious but not to believe every wild tale. Then, once they parted ways, Daenerys gathered Grey Worm, Tyrion, and a few trusted knights to discuss what to do. "If there's truly a plague, we must return at once," Daenerys declared. "We left a skeleton guard in the Red Keep. The city was still raw from the war. An outbreak could spread rapidly." Tyrion nodded. "We can push for faster travel. If the rumors are false, we'll learn soon enough. But if they're true," he trailed off, remembering King's Landing in the throes of disease once before, when refugee camps lined the outer walls, bodies stacked on carts. That was many years past, yet the city's squalor made it susceptible. They agreed to hasten their pace. For the next 6 days, they rode from dawn until dusk, stopping only to rest the horses and gather minimal supplies. Tensions ran high as no further caravans crossed their path to confirm or deny the rumor. At last, they came upon the winding road that sloped downward toward King's Landing. The battered city walls lay visible in the distance, the Red Keep looming behind them like a wounded beast. As they neared the main gate, Tyrion noticed it stood open, and a queue of people, carts, and livestock jammed the approach. No visible sign of plague or quarantine. But the moment they entered, a cacophony of noise washed over them. The city was anything but calm. Guards in Targaryen-colored cloaks roamed, trying to direct traffic. A throng of peasants milled about near the gatehouses. Tyrion guided his horse carefully through, Daenerys at his side, while Grey Worm barked orders at the Unsullied to clear a path. Some in the crowd recognized them. Murmurs traveled quickly. A few even cheered in relief, though others just gazed in uneasy silence. Tyrion spotted a guard captain he recognized from the Red Keep, a bearded fellow named Harwell. He beckoned the man over. "What is all this commotion?" Tyrion demanded. Harwell bowed hastily. "Your Grace, people are trying to enter the city or leave it. We've had an influx from the surrounding countryside, seeking the crown's help. It's been chaos. As for the rumored plague, there was a brief outbreak of fever in Flea Bottom, but the maesters contained it. It's not the plague, more a flux of the bowels that claimed a handful of victims. No widespread sickness now." Daenerys exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank the gods. And why has no one sent word to us?" Harwell scratched his beard. "We did send riders. Possibly they took a different route or were waylaid. The roads aren't safe." He cleared his throat. "But there's worse news, I'm afraid. 2 nights ago, a group of armed rebels broke into the Red Keep's courtyard, shouting treason against your rule. They were captured, but the city is on edge." Tyrion felt a headache forming. Who were they? Former Lannister men? Or Stark loyalists? Or something else? "Unclear," Harwell admitted. "They wore no clear sigils. One man claimed to fight in the name of a true king, but gave no name. Another shouted about vengeance for the dragon's fire. They were disorganized, but dangerous." Daenerys' eyes hardened. "Are they still alive?" "Yes, your majesty. We hold them in the dungeons. Their leader might talk if pressed." Daenerys gave Tyrion a look that conveyed both exasperation and steel resolve. "We'll speak with them ourselves. Let's reach the Red Keep at once." They pushed through the crowds, weaving amid donkey carts and the press of bodies. Tyrion glimpsed the city's ongoing reconstruction. Scaffolds along damaged walls, piles of stone blocks, new timbers waiting to be raised. The stink of sweat and cooking fires hung heavy in the summer heat, but at least there was no stench of corpses or widespread disease. Tyrion tried to accept that small mercy. Still, every face he saw reminded him of the city's trauma, and he felt the weight of responsibility settle anew on his shoulders. Inside the Red Keep, the atmosphere was tense but orderly. The guards saluted, parted ranks to admit Daenerys and Tyrion. Servants rushed up, each trying to deliver messages. Tyrion brushed them aside for the moment, insisting on visiting the dungeons to see these rebels. They descended the winding steps into the subterranean gloom, accompanied by Grey Worm and a handful of unsullied bearing torches. The cells were damp and ill-lit. Rats skittered between puddles. A rancid odor clung to the air. The jailer, a sallow-faced man, led them to a locked cage in the far corner where half a dozen men huddled. Their clothing was tattered and bruises showed on their faces. One man, older, with a shock of gray hair, rose at their approach. He gripped the bars, glaring at Daenerys. Tyrion peered at him. Something about the man's bearing suggested a soldier's discipline, albeit worn down by defeat. "You come at last," the man rasped. "The Dragon Queen, and the dwarf who calls himself king." Tyrion stepped forward, letting the torchlight illuminate his face. "Who are you? Why attack the crown?" The man's lip curled. "I am nothing but a son of Westeros, done with watching your kind trample these lands. You are a false king, a puppet on a dragon's string. And she's the usurper who burned thousands. We acted to end your tyranny." Daenerys' gaze darkened. "End tyranny by murdering what remains of the monarchy? Then what? You plunged the realm into endless war." He spat. "A war for freedom, perhaps? Better that than living under the boot of a Targaryen butcher." Tyrion sighed. "I imagine you served under someone. A name, if you please." The prisoner only sneered. "I served the rightful cause. It has no name you'd understand." Grey Worm banged his spear against the bars, but the man didn't flinch. Daenerys' voice, cold as ice, cut through the tension. "We can show you mercy if you speak truth. If not, she let it hang." The men behind the gray-haired rebel shrank back, some trembling. One of them, younger and evidently less hardened, burst out, "We were told a new leader would rise in the north. Maybe Lord Stark?" Or he stopped as the older man whirled on him, hissing curses. But it was too late. Tyrion caught enough of the slip. Daenerys turned a sharp look on Tyrion, who cleared his throat. "So you believe the North will lead a fresh rebellion? And you decided to help spark it here?" The younger rebel pressed his face into his hands, terrified. The older man grabbed the bars, refusing to speak further. Tyrion nodded to Grey Worm, who stepped forward, opened the cell, and roughly hauled the older man out to a bench in the corridor. Daenerys approached, her expression deadly calm. "Do you speak for Sansa Stark?" she asked softly. "Has she sent you?" He laughed once, a joyless bark. "No. Lady Stark wants nothing to do with King's Landing, from what I hear. But the North stands free, and many across the realm are done kneeling. You can posture as you like, but you can't keep hold of the whole continent." Tyrion interjected, "We do not wish for more bloodshed. We only want peace. If the North chooses independence, we'll negotiate that in time. Raising arms here in King's Landing will only bring needless death." The man sneered. "That's easy for you to say, Dwarf King. You already have your seat of power." Daenerys signaled Grey Worm, who grabbed the prisoner's arm. "Put them back in their cell," she ordered. "We'll question them again later. Perhaps after they've reflected on their situation." The guards complied, dragging the cursing rebel away. Tyrion frowned, dread curling in his gut. So more and more people harbored the notion of rising against the crown. They might not be numerous now, but scattered revolts could spark into a broader conflagration if the realm didn't find equilibrium soon. Daenerys turned to him, her eyes reflecting torchlight. "So it begins," she said, voice taut. 1,000 grudges, 1,000 would-be leaders. When word spreads that we punish rebels harshly, more might plot in secret." Tyrion nodded grimly. "We must show we are not tyrants, but also that we won't tolerate armed revolt." He rubbed his temple. "I'll speak with the City Watch, see that they keep calm in the streets. Meanwhile, we should hold open court tomorrow, hear petitions, remind people we haven't abandoned them." Daenerys took a slow breath. "Agreed. And we'll find out if Sansa truly has anything to do with these whispers of rebellion." She paused. "I doubt she's encouraging violent attacks, but her independence might be fueling the notion that anyone can shrug off the Iron Throne." With that, they left the dungeons. The next day, Tyrion and Daenerys held court in the partially restored throne room. The Iron Throne still perched at the dais, battered but formidable, its melted edges a permanent reminder of dragon fire. Tyrion wore the crown that Daenerys had commissioned for him, a simple band of dark metal understated compared to the elaborate designs of past kings. Daenerys stood to the side, quietly watchful, flanked by Unsullied. Dozens of petitioners and onlookers trickled in. Some sought justice for robberies, others asked for help rebuilding a burned street. A few brought trivial feuds. Tyrion tried to handle each case with fairness, occasionally deferring to Daenerys for a final nod. The Watchers studied every nuance of their interaction, no doubt spinning rumors about who truly wielded power. Tyrion made no attempt to hide that he conferred with Daenerys. Their arrangement was not a blatant puppet act, but a more subtle dance of authority. Midday brought a lull. Tyrion called a recess. Servants fetched water and fruit to help him endure the sweltering heat in the throne room. Daenerys was about to step away when a messenger hurried in, dusty from travel. He bowed low before them. "Your Majesties." A letter from the north. He produced a sealed parchment. Tyrion took it, noting the wolf's head sigil of House Stark pressed into the wax. His heart quickened. Daenerys nodded for him to read it. He broke the seal, scanning the contents. The words were brief, in Sansa's precise handwriting. She acknowledged the rumors of unrest, insisting that the North had no part in stirring rebellion within the Crownlands. But she made clear that the North stood apart, free and determined to stay so. She also wrote that if Daenerys or Tyrion Lannister wished to send an emissary or come themselves, they could speak on neutral ground at Moat Cailin. Sansa offered no promise of bending the knee, but neither did she threaten war. The letter ended with a simple statement of fact that the North remembered all the realm's betrayals and would never again be subject to southern chaos. Tyrion handed the parchment to Daenerys, whose gaze flicked across the words. Her mouth thinned at the final lines. She passed it back in silence. Grey Worm watched her, unreadable. Tyrion spoke quietly. An invitation of sorts. She wants a negotiation at Moat Cailin. It's not quite an ambush, but it's also not guaranteed safe. Yet we may need to accept. Daenerys' voice was calm but frigid. Sansa offers no quarter for the idea of rejoining the realm. She's telling us she'll remain independent. But if we refuse to meet her, we risk more rebels claiming the North is the rightful seat of power. If we go, we might at least defuse some tension. Tyrion nodded. We can't forcibly subdue the North again, not without repeating horrors we both regret. Perhaps we can at least reach a compact, trade, mutual defense. Something. She glanced at the Iron Throne's jagged shape, a flicker of bitterness in her eyes. So many times I believed I would unite the 7 kingdoms. Now maybe 6 or fewer remain. But if peace requires letting the North go, so be it. Her tone suggested it was not an easy concession, but a pragmatic one. Tyrion kept his voice low, mindful of the curious eyes nearby. We can leave soon then. Arrange a suitable escort. I'll craft letters to Sansa to confirm the meeting details. In the meantime, we must keep the city stable. The Master of Laws, whoever we can trust, will remain in charge here while we're away. Daenerys sighed. We still have no proper small council. Only a handful of lesser lords, half of whom are incompetent or cowering. But we'll do as we must. That evening, Tyrion assembled the most reliable lords and officials he could find in King's Landing. Gendry Baratheon had returned from the Stormlands, uncertain but earnest in his loyalty. Tyrion asked him to oversee the city's day-to-day management while they traveled north. Gendry balked at first. He had little experience in governance, but Tyrion reassured him that any mistakes would be corrected later and that the Red Keep's senior stewards could advise him. Gendry finally agreed, reluctant but determined not to fail. Tyrion hoped it would work. The city needed a figurehead who wasn't a foreign soldier. Gendry, with his humble origins and new lordship, might just earn the people's respect. So, less than 2 weeks after returning to King's Landing, Tyrion and Daenerys prepared to depart again, this time heading for the north. Word spread quickly that the king and the Dragon Queen would ride forth, presumably to parley with Lady Sansa. Some whispered that Daenerys intended to burn Winterfell if Sansa refused fealty. Others claimed Tyrion would secure the North's re-entrance into the realm by wily negotiation. The city buzzed with rumors, but Tyrion had no time to quell them all. The day of departure dawned cloudy and cool. 100 Unsullied gathered in the Red Keep's courtyard, along with a handful of knights loyal to the crown. Daenerys wore a cloak of dark leather, reminiscent of her gear in the final days of the war. Tyrion wore a padded traveling coat under a short cloak pinned with the hand's brooch. He still kept the crown in a saddlebag, thinking it best not to flaunt it on the road. Grey Worm mounted a horse, though the Unsullied always seemed more comfortable on foot. Drogon was nowhere in sight. The dragon was presumably hunting somewhere distant. Daenerys had chosen not to bring him so near to the city again unless absolutely necessary. They wound out of King's Landing through throngs of onlookers. Some waved half-heartedly, others muttered curses. Tyrion tried not to let the hostility sink in too deep. They followed the Rose Road north, intending to veer toward the King's Road that led through the neck. Their pace was steady, but an undercurrent of tension coiled in every rider's posture. The north was a long journey away, and they had no guarantee of a warm welcome. The first few days passed without incident, though they encountered occasional travelers who gawked at the sight of Daenerys Targaryen riding at the head of an armed escort. Now and then, Tyrion engaged locals in conversation, gleaning the same refrain: the land was wary, uncertain, not sure whether to trust or fear the new king's regime. "At least we're not being burned or starved," one farmer remarked. But who knows when that might change? Tyrion could only muster a sad smile, unable to promise that no further violence would ever erupt. As they reached the heart of the Riverlands again, Edmure Tully appeared with a small cavalry party to greet them. The meeting took place on a wide stretch of road near a shallow stream. Edmure dismounted and offered a short bow, his manner stiff but polite. Daenerys acknowledged him with a measured tilt of her head. Tyrion advanced a few steps, reminding himself that Edmure was the Lord of Riverrun and thus a vital piece of the realm's stability. "Lord Edmure," Tyrion said, voice echoing slightly in the open air. "You've come to meet us on the road?" Edmure shrugged. "I heard you travel north. Riverrun isn't far off this route, and I wanted to learn your intentions. People whisper that you plan to wrest the north back by force." Daenerys' expression was unreadable. "We mean to negotiate with Sansa Stark, not wage another war. The last one cost all of us dearly." Edmure studied her. "Good. I'm relieved you haven't come to raise Dragonfire again. The Riverlands won't survive another wholesale conflict." He turned to Tyrion. "If you'll allow my men to ride with you some distance, I can show that House Tully stands by the crown, provided the crown does not demand fresh tribute or soldiers from our already weary land." Tyrion considered it. On one hand, more men at their back could be a reassuring symbol. On the other, Sansa might read it as a provocation, a sign that the crown was bringing allies to intimidate the north. Finally, Tyrion said, "A small escort from Riverrun is acceptable, but keep your force modest. We don't want to appear we're marching an army." Edmure agreed. A handful of Tully cavalry joined, while the rest returned to Riverrun. So the royal column grew slightly. Days stretched into weeks as they continued north along muddy roads. The air cooled further. The nights brought heavier winds. Daenerys rode in silence much of the time, mind fixed on uncertain outcomes. Tyrion occasionally tried to jest or lighten the mood, but the heaviness returned quickly. Grey Worm remained ever alert, scanning for threats. When they finally reached the King's Road proper, the sight of the wide, well-worn road triggered memories in Tyrion. He recalled his first journey north, years ago when the realm was simpler in his mind, before all the wars that shattered it. Now, the King's Road was in poor condition, dotted with potholes and rotted stretches. They passed villages abandoned or half-populated. In one such place, Tyrion saw a child playing in the dirt outside a collapsed hut, pushing a wooden horse. The child looked up, eyes wide, as the procession passed. Tyrion's heart twisted. He gave the boy a small wave, and the boy waved back uncertainly, clutching his toy as if it were a shield against the world. Soon, they approached the Neck, a swampy region infamous for bogs and hidden dangers. In centuries past, Moat Cailin had served as the vital fortress controlling passage between the north and the southern kingdoms. Now it lay partially ruined, but still formidable enough to deter large armies. Sansa's letter had named Moat Cailin as the meeting site, presumably so the north could stand watchful while allowing the crown a chance to negotiate. They made camp a day's ride south of Moat Cailin. Tyrion and Daenerys consulted on final details, penning a short message to Sansa to announce their imminent arrival, which they sent via a rider under a truce flag. They didn't want to stumble into an ambush or a misunderstanding. In the gray light of dawn, the rider returned with an escort of Stark bannermen come to guide them. So the final leg of the journey commenced. Tyrion felt his nerves coil tight as they rode through the marshy terrain, each step of the horse's hooves squelching in mud. At last, Moat Cailin rose before them, a cluster of old towers and curtain walls perched on slightly higher ground, ringed by boggy waters. Tall reeds swayed in the breeze. Watchfires glimmered along the ramparts. The Stark banner fluttered from a makeshift post, the gray dire wolf on a field of white. A line of northern soldiers stood near the main gate, furs draped over their shoulders. Daenerys halted her mare, scanning the fortress with hooded eyes. Grey Worm tensed, hand near his spear, but Tyrion reached over and murmured that they were here to parley, not fight. They advanced slowly, unsullied in neat ranks behind, Edmure's men bringing up the rear. A northern officer stepped forth, introduced himself as Lord Serwyn. He bowed stiffly, then said, "Welcome. Lady Sansa awaits you inside. She instructs that no more than 20 armed companions enter. The rest must remain outside the walls." Daenerys glanced at Tyrion, who gave a slight nod. "We'll comply," she said, dismounting. A swirl of tension rippled among the Unsullied, but Daenerys commanded Grey Worm to select a small detail. Edmure Tully chose 2 men. Tyrion and Daenerys would of course go, and so the group of about 20 advanced on foot, passing through the gate into Moat Caelin's courtyard. It was a stark place, pun intended, its ancient stones black with age, many walls collapsed or eroded. Northern soldiers, weathered and grim, lined the perimeter, eyes keen on the arrivals. At the far end of the courtyard, Sansa Stark stood beneath a sagging arch, flanked by Brienne of Tarth and a handful of northern lords. Tyrion's gaze went first to Sansa's face. She wore a heavy cloak of grey wool clasped at her throat with a silver wolf's head. Her hair was partially braided, copper strands catching the pale daylight. She watched them approach with measured calm, her posture regal in its own right. Tyrion recalled her as the frightened girl he once wed under duress so many years ago. Now she possessed a quiet authority he could scarcely have imagined then. Daenerys halted a respectful distance away. Tyrion stepped up beside her. Sansa studied them, then inclined her head, though she did not kneel. "Your Grace," she said, addressing Tyrion in a voice steady and cool. "Queen Daenerys." She paused. "Welcome to the North." Tyrion returned the half-bow. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. We come in peace to discuss the future between the North and the Crown." Sansa's gaze flickered to Daenerys. The Queen inclined her head. "We've no desire to bring war to the North," Daenerys said. "We only hope to find a path to coexist, if not unity." A subtle tension wreathed the courtyard. Brienne of Tarth stood ready, her hand near the pommel of her sword, though she bore no open hostility. Tyrion recognized a few faces among the northern retinue. Lord Glover, looking stern, a Karstark representative, younger but equally solemn. None seemed eager to greet Daenerys with warmth, especially given the city's fate under her dragons. Sansa gestured for them to move inside what remained of Moat Caelin's hall. It was a cramped space of old stone and half a roof, but a large fire burned in a central hearth. Rough benches stood around it. The retinues filed in, taking up positions. Grey Worm hovered protectively near Daenerys, while Brienne stayed close to Sansa. Tyrion exhaled, steeling himself. Now came the delicate dance of words and hidden resentments. Sansa gestured to a bench. "Please sit. We've prepared some refreshment, though it is simple fare." Daenerys and Tyrion settled, with Grey Worm remaining standing behind them. Sansa took a seat opposite them, flanked by her lords. A servant brought jugs of ale and trays of bread. They all ignored the food at first, too tense for pleasantries. Tyrion began, voice careful. "We received your letter. We appreciate that you disavow any involvement in the rebel attacks on King's Landing. Nevertheless, dissatisfaction in the South references the North's new independence as a symbol. Some believe the realm should fracture entirely." Sansa studied him. "We do not encourage anyone to rebel violently. The North simply took back its own freedom after the wars and the devastation caused by the Iron Throne's inaction and then by the Dragon's fury." She paused, letting the words hang in the smoky air. "We will not return to the fold, Tyrion. That much is certain." Daenerys' jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "Then let's discuss how we coexist. You must know that pockets of the realm see you as a rallying cry. We would prefer to keep the peace. Perhaps a formal treaty can settle borders and secure trade routes so we do not devolve into petty conflicts." Lord Glover spoke up, voice gruff. "Trade, yes. The North can sell lumber, hides, grain when we have surplus. What do we gain in return from the Iron Throne?" Tyrion answered calmly. "Southern goods, wines, cloth, more advanced metalwork in certain regions. Also, if raiders come from the Iron Islands or across the sea to harass the North, we can provide support if you desire it." Sansa's eyes flickered with thought. "Support can be a double-edged sword. You may arrive to help and never leave. That's what many fear about Targaryens or Lannisters." Daenerys exhaled slowly. "I will not force my armies upon you. The North can protect itself. We only wish to maintain a cordial alliance, mutual defense, should foreign threats emerge." Sansa looked at Brienne, then back to Daenerys. "And the North does not forget what happened in King's Landing. To burn thousands even after the bells had rung, it frightens us all. Why should we trust that you won't do the same if the North crosses you?" A tight silence fell. Tyrion felt Daenerys' tension radiate. He decided to intervene. The bells that day can't be undone. Queen Daenerys has expressed remorse. She wishes to prove her reign will not be built on fear alone. Part of that proof is respecting your independence, Lady Sansa. Sansa's gaze shifted to him. You speak for her as king in the south. But do you truly hold the power, Tyrion? Or is this arrangement still a shadow? He knew the entire room listened for his answer. He chose his words deliberately. We share power because the realm needs more than any one voice. Call it a shadow arrangement if you like, but it ensures checks. I hold the throne publicly with my queen behind me. If either of us strays toward cruelty, the other can pull back. Sansa's expression remained inscrutable. Perhaps that's enough for the south. For the north, we prefer to stand on our own. I have no intention of invading your lands, toppling your throne, or aiding others who might do so. We can sign a non-aggression pact, open trade lines, and promise mutual assistance against foreign invasion. But the north will not be subject to King's Landing's decrees. Daenerys gave a single nod slowly. That is acceptable provided we ensure safe passage for each other's merchants. We would also appreciate an arrangement that any criminals fleeing north will be returned and vice versa to face justice. We cannot have outlaws escaping simply by crossing some invisible line. Sansa inclined her head. Agreed. Brienne, draw up the terms. Let each side sign. Brienne nodded gravely, gesturing for a scribe to begin drafting. Tyrion felt a pang of relief. This was not the unity Daenerys once wanted, but it might avert further bloodshed. He watched Sansa's face, recalling how fate had once tied them in a brief, unhappy marriage. She had grown into a strong leader, stern but not vindictive. A small part of him felt oddly proud. As the scribe worked, Sansa asked quietly, "And what of Jon? Has anyone heard from him?" A flicker of emotion crossed Daenerys' face, but she kept her voice level. "No. Last we heard, he traveled beyond the wall with the wildlings. Perhaps he remains there, or perhaps he roams. He has chosen exile, it seems." Sansa's gaze dropped momentarily. "I have not heard from him either. Many in the north still speak of him, but he has vanished into the lands of always winter." Tyrion cleared his throat. "If he does appear, I trust the north will find him welcome. Jon Snow, or Aegon Targaryen as he was called, deserves whatever peace he seeks." Sansa nodded, though her eyes held sadness. Then she shifted to address Daenerys. "These terms we're drafting, are they to your liking? You once vowed you would sit on the Iron Throne as ruler of all 7 kingdoms." Daenerys clasped her hands, gazing into the flames flickering in the hearth. "War taught me that my birthright, if it ever truly existed, was overshadowed by the cost in lives. I cannot force the North to kneel without repeating atrocities. If you vow not to war against me, I will do the same. Let the North remain free. My throne in King's Landing is not worth the blood of thousands more." Sansa studied her as if searching for signs of deception. Then she gave a slow, respectful dip of her head. "Wise words at last. We will hold you to them." When the scribe finished, Brienne read the agreement aloud. The North and the Crown recognized each other's sovereignty, pledging no hostile action, guaranteeing the return of criminals, and opening roads for trade. Both parties would meet again in 2 years to reassess or reaffirm the treaty. Those were the broad strokes, intentionally simple. Sansa signed on behalf of the North using the title Lady of Winterfell, Protector of the North. Daenerys and Tyrion both signed on behalf of the Crown, Tyrion adding his name under the style Tyrion of House Lannister, King of Westeros, with Daenerys' signet pressed beside it. The tension in the room ebbed slightly after that. They rose from the benches, preparing to depart the hall. Sansa walked with them a short distance into the courtyard. She paused at the threshold. Outside, the northern wind whispered over the bog. "King Tyrion," she said quietly, "I hope that for once our realm can know more than fleeting peace. If you truly rule with compassion, perhaps there's a chance." Tyrion met her gaze, remembering the frightened girl she'd been. "It's all I can strive for, my lady. May your north find its own peace as well." With that, the parley concluded. The Crown's party was led back outside the fortress. Grey Worm assembled their men while the northern soldiers watched from the walls. Daenerys cast one final look at Sansa, who stood by Brienne. Neither woman moved to embrace or exchange pleasantries. But at least no swords were drawn, no dragonfire loomed overhead. Tyrion took that as a step forward. They rode south the next day, the newly signed treaty rolled and guarded in a leather tube. The Unsullied marched with a quiet sense of accomplishment, though not victory. This was a compromise, not a triumph. Daenerys said little, but Tyrion sensed her acceptance of the changed reality. The North was gone as far as the Crown's authority was concerned. But the realm might be spared another bitter war. That, Tyrion reflected, was an outcome worth embracing. As they neared the border between the north and the Riverlands, the sky darkened and a slow, cold rain began to fall. It slicked the roads to mud. The travelers hunched under cloaks, pressing on. Tyrion listened to the rhythmic patter, letting it wash away some of the tension that had knotted in his shoulders. Mid-journey, as they sheltered under a rocky outcrop, Daenerys spoke quietly to Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Edmure Tully. "We'll return to King's Landing with our treaty, announced that the North is separate. That might embolden Dorne or the Ironborn to seek their own independence. We must be prepared." Tyrion sighed. Yes, the realm might indeed fracture further, but we can attempt to show the benefits of being allied rather than separate. We can approach Dorne with the same courtesy. If they want independence, we can negotiate. Or perhaps they'll remain if the crown truly respects their customs. Better a realm of many partners than one forcibly bound by terror. Daenerys gazed into the rain. So be it. The dream of a unified 7 kingdoms under my rule, that may die here. But if it spares more bloodshed, perhaps it's a worthy sacrifice. Grey Worm shifted. And if the Iron Islands raid our coasts again? We repel them, Daenerys answered. Then offer them terms. If they refuse, we defend ourselves, no more than that. We will not burn entire villages for the crimes of a few. She paused, glancing at Tyrion. That is the way forward, isn't it? He smiled wryly. It's one way. We can't promise it will be easy or that no one will ever test our resolve. But if we rule with measured justice, the realm might slowly heal. At least, that's what I keep telling myself. She let out a soft, rueful laugh, the first sign of levity in days. And I shall keep telling myself that I have wise counsel by my side. They resumed their southward march. Over the next few weeks, they passed once again through the Riverlands, pausing only briefly at Riverrun to relay the news to Edmure's stewards and confirm that the Tullys would remain vassals if they so chose. Edmure seemed content enough, though he worried about further fragmentation of the realm. Tyrion assured him they would do everything possible to maintain alliances. Edmure agreed to continue shipping grain to King's Landing so long as the crown offered fair compensation. Another small compromise sealed. Finally, the spires of the capital rose in the distance, backlit by a stormy sky. Tyrion felt an odd pang of relief to see the Red Keep again, that place of so many torments. Word had spread of their return, and a delegation of watchmen and city officials waited at the gates to welcome them. The banner of the Iron Throne flapped in the wind, tattered around the edges. People gathered to watch the procession, some curious about the outcome in the north, others simply relieved that the city's rulers had come back. Inside the Red Keep's courtyard, Gendry emerged to greet them, flanked by a few knights. He bowed hastily, running a hand through his dark hair. "Your graces, the city's, well, not exactly tranquil, but not in full revolt either." He looked a bit harried. A few small riots flared up over bread distribution. The gold cloaks handled them. Tyrion dismounted, clapping a hand on Gendry's shoulder. "Thank you for holding it all together. Your efforts are appreciated." Gendry grinned sheepishly. "I'm no hand of the king, but I did what I could." Daenerys dismounted, letting an unsullied stable hand lead her mare away. She spoke quietly to Gendry. "We bring news from the north. Sansa Stark has agreed to a treaty of independence." Gendry's eyebrows rose. "So they're completely separate now?" Tyrion nodded, leaning on his horse's saddle. "Yes, but with open trade and mutual non-aggression. We'll announce it tomorrow." Gendry blew out a breath. "People will talk. People always talk," Tyrion said softly. "But we'll show them that this is how we avoid another war." That night, the Red Keep felt strangely familiar yet changed. Tyrion retired to his old chambers, noticing new cracks in the walls, a new set of carpets, fresh torches. So much had shifted since Daenerys' conquest, yet the shape of the fortress remained. He lit a candle on his desk, rummaging for parchment to prepare his official announcement for the city. Outside the window, the lights of King's Landing glimmered. He wondered how many citizens truly cared about the realm's shape, or whether they just wanted enough bread to make it through the next day. When morning came, Tyrion and Daenerys assembled the court in the throne room. It was a modest gathering, including local lords, city watch officers, tradesmen, and a smattering of curious onlookers. Tyrion, crown resting on his brow, ascended the dais and briefly recounted their journey, concluding with the formal statement that the crown recognized the North as a free and independent kingdom under Lady Sansa Stark. Several gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Tyrion pressed on, explaining the terms of trade and non-aggression. He finished by emphasizing that the realm was no longer a monolith, but that King's Landing stood ready to treat with all regions fairly. Let none fear the crown's wrath if they abided by the law. Daenerys stood beside the throne, silent until Tyrion concluded. Then, in a clear, measured voice, she affirmed that any rebellion against the crown's new order would be met with justice, not indiscriminate violence. She vowed that the Age of Dragons would not be an age of terror. The Watchers exchanged uncertain glances. Some bowed, though many retained a guarded stance. But the seeds of a new normal were sown. In the weeks that followed, more letters arrived from across Westeros. Dorne demanded clarification of its own status, hinting it might likewise prefer independence. The Iron Islands remained fractious, with some captains declaring for the crown while others launched raids. House Arryn in the Vale seemed content to stay under the crown, provided the Vale was left in peace. The Stormlands followed Gendry Baratheon's lead, acknowledging Tyrion and Daenerys, at least for now. The Westerlands, so diminished in strength, remained crown territory mostly by default, though Tyrion's own ambivalent tie to Casterly Rock gave them a figure to rally behind if they wished. Through it all, Tyrion and Daenerys worked in uneasy tandem. He handled daily governance, finance, and diplomacy. She oversaw the army's discipline, the laws to protect freedmen, and the moral impetus that still burned within her. More than once, tensions flared. Daenerys found it frustrating that rebellious lords could not simply be compelled to obey. Tyrion reminded her that compelling them by force would renew the cycle of bloodshed. Each time, they reached a compromise. Step by laborious step, a structure emerged, a looser realm with multiple powers coexisting and aligning for mutual benefit when needed. It was not the grand unification once proclaimed by Aegon the Conqueror. Nor was it the absolute fragmentation that so many rebels desired. It was an in-between state, precarious but perhaps sustainable. The small folk continued to endure. Breadlines still formed, but reconstruction advanced. Carpenters replaced burned rooftops, blacksmiths shaped iron gates. The city's taverns buzzed with rumors that the Dwarf King was cunning enough to keep the Dragon Queen's temper in check, that Daenerys was reigning in her own darkest impulses out of guilt, that the North's success might spawn new secessions. Through it all, no one could deny that the capital had grown calmer, if not entirely at ease. Late one evening, Tyrion found himself alone on a high rampart, watching torchlight flicker across the city below. He breathed in the night air, heavy with the distant tang of the sea. Footsteps approached. He turned to see Daenerys wrapped in a dark cloak against the chill. She came to stand beside him, glancing out over the sprawl of rooftops. Sometimes, she said, I stand here and recall how I saw the city from Drogon's back, the day I burned it. The memory never leaves me. Tyrion nodded. Nor me. Yet you've chosen a different path now. That is something. She pressed her lips together. Is it enough? Thousands died. Their families remain forever haunted. Sometimes I wonder if I deserve to rule after that. You're ruling with a gentler hand now, Tyrion said. Call it atonement, call it growth. The realm sees it even if they doubt your sincerity. Over time, perhaps they'll accept that you've changed. A faint, sad smile curved her lips. Perhaps. Maybe in another generation, the city's children will hear a different story of Daenerys Targaryen. Or maybe they'll always curse my name. I cannot say. Tyrion touched the cold stone of the battlement. Legends are shaped by what we do next, not just what we've done. If we can keep forging peace, if we can show that the crown is not a seat of tyranny, some might forgive. She exhaled, gazing at the star-smeared sky. Then, softly, thank you, Tyrion. For staying. For not giving up on me or this realm. He bowed his head. I'm not the easiest man to put faith in, but I believe that a better future is still possible. And so, I remain. A hush fell. The wind brushed past, carrying the faint sounds of distant laughter in the streets. For all the heartbreak, life went on in King's Landing. People worked, loved, and dreamed, forging ahead in the aftermath of war. Daenerys turned away from the edge, and Tyrion followed her back into the Red Keep's corridors. In that moment, they were not the unstoppable conquerors or the cunning dwarfish king, they were just two weary souls trying to hold together a realm that had been shattered. The next day, a raven arrived with fresh news from Dorne, inviting emissaries to Sunspear to discuss terms of mutual prosperity. Tyrion raised an eyebrow at the letter, reading it out to Daenerys. It seems the Dornish might be open to a loose confederation if we respect their historical autonomy. Shall we go, or send someone we trust? Daenerys half-smiled. I suppose the journey never ends, does it? Tyrion tapped the parchment. If forging a freer realm means traveling from one corner of Westeros to another, then so be it. Better journeys than wars. She nodded, calling for the scribes to prepare a formal response. And so the wheel continued to turn, but more slowly, with fewer spikes and fewer crushed beneath it. Tyrion reflected that the history books might call this era many things: a fragile alliance, a patchwork monarchy, the legacy of the Dragon Queen's remorse. But however it would be named, he hoped it would be known as a time when fewer children had to watch their world burn. In the coming months, King's Landing would see more delegations. Some from Westerosi lords intrigued by the new order, others from across the sea, seeking trade or alliances. The city's markets gradually revived. People spoke of building anew, not from fear of Dragonfire, but from the hope that they might profit in a land no longer consumed by constant war. Tyrion was neither naive nor complacent. Bandits still roamed, tensions simmered, and a single calamity could unravel everything. But as he trudged through each day's tasks, as he listened to petitions or corresponded with distant lords, he held onto the idea that for the first time in a long while, Westeros had a genuine chance at stability. And so Daenerys Targaryen remained queen from the shadows, guiding policy, her name still stirring awe and dread in equal measure. Tyrion Lannister sat the Iron Throne as king, publicly shaping the realm's direction. Together, they formed an unlikely pair: the dwarf who had once been the outcast of House Lannister, the dragon rider who had once dreamed of absolute conquest. Their partnership was uneasy, built on regrets and second chances. Yet it might just be enough. Sometimes, when Tyrion gazed out at the city from the throne's dais, he remembered every bitter moment that had led him there, the jokes at his expense, the betrayals, the horrors of war. The Iron Throne had always been a symbol of ultimate power and of inevitable cruelty. Now he hoped to transform it into a seat of governance that listened more than it roared. Daenerys, for her part, had laid aside her thirst for immediate domination. She too was learning that rule demanded patience, compromise, and a willingness to let go of old claims in favor of forging something new. In that manner, life in Westeros proceeded. House by house, region by region, alliances formed, fell, or changed. There were no grand celebrations of unity, no boisterous feasts proclaiming the dawn of a golden age. Rather, there was a slow, quiet settling of differences, a practical acceptance that the Dragon Queen and the Imp King were better than endless war. Little by little, roads reopened for trade. Little by little, peasants returned to farmland once ablaze. Little by little, the shrines and septs saw supplicants praying less for deliverance from horror and more for the simpler boons of rain, harvest, and safe births. One day, standing on the palace steps, Tyrion watched as a group of children chased each other around the courtyard. He heard their shrieks of laughter echoing where once the screams of war had resounded. He smiled ruefully and thought, perhaps all this was worthwhile if it means these children can grow up without seeing dragons raining destruction from the skies. Daenerys arrived at his side, silent for a moment as she too beheld the children's game. Then she said, almost to herself, "Let them never see what we have seen." He nodded, swallowing. "That is the hope." And the two returned inside the Red Keep, the queen in the shadows, the king upon the throne, working together to ensure that Westeros, though scarred, though divided, might endure. Their story was far from finished, the conflicts far from fully resolved. Yet in that moment, at least, the realm breathed more freely than it had in years. The path was not easy or guaranteed, but it was theirs. And that fragile hope was worth more than all the crowns of melted swords in the world.